Hello everybody, good afternoon. It has just gone 5 p.m, so we should get going with this, the first of 3 panel discussions being presented by CMU as part of Independent Venue Week. It's very exciting to be involved in Independent Venue Week this year. We've got 3 really interesting panel discussions coming up today, tomorrow and on Thursday, each in the 5 p.m. slot. Some very interesting guests and some very interesting topics to discuss. But before I get into the nitty gritty, I should quickly tell you who I am. So my name is Chris Cook. I'm the founder and managing director of CMU. We're a London-based company that helps people to navigate and understand the music business. And we do that through our media and through our training and our reports and all sorts of other things as well. So that's who I am and that's who we are. So with this session, we are looking at the live music ecosystem and the grassroots and independent live music sector and scene and the impact of COVID. And we will be looking a little bit at the extent of the impact of COVID on the live music industry at large and the independent and grassroots live music community in particular, but also at how the industry has come together and the community has come together in, I would say, as someone who's been writing about the business for 20 years, in unprecedented ways. Now, that has been out of necessity, but I think in many ways, some great stuff has been achieved through that community coming together. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to review how and why that happened. We're going to review some of the initiatives and organizations and programs that came by as part of it. And also we are going to have a look at the future and how the live music industry and the live music community benefits long term. So that's what we're going to be talking about over the next 60 minutes. But what I want to do first is to get each of my 5 brilliant panelists to quickly introduce themselves and maybe just give us the 60, maybe 90-second introduction to what you do. So a little bit about your background, your role, your company, and your position. So we'll get each of our panelists to introduce themselves in turn. So let's do this. I'm going to do it in alphabetical order because that's nice and fair, isn't it? Which means we're going to begin with Claire from the Arts Council.
Hi there, I'm Claire Mera-Nelson. I'm Director of Music at Arts Council England. So Arts Council is what's called an arm's length body of government. That means we're independent of the government, but we are partially funded by government and partially funded by the National Lottery. And my particular role is to look over all of the investment that we have in music across all genres, all different types of activity, right across the country.
Fantastic. Okay, so that's the first of our panelists introduced, and this is now a test of my alphabet abilities. I think we probably means we're going to David from the FAC next.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, hi, I'm David Martin. I'm the Chief Exec of the Featured Artists Coalition, the FAC. We're the trade body which represents the rights and interests of artists, and we do that in 3 ways: via bringing together a community of artists and educating them, through research and thought leadership, and through advocacy and lobbying. So the past 12 months has been incredibly busy for us during this period. So thank you.
Okay, going to come to Ellie next. And one thing you'll find is some of our panelists are wearing multiple hats. So Ellie is here in her own right as an artist manager, but also as a board member of the Music Managers Forum. So let's get Ellie to quickly say hello.
Hi, I'm Ellie Giles. I've been managing for about 8 years now. I run a company. I mostly work with artists that would be seen as independent artists. I have artists such as Warm Dusha, Erlen Cooper and Bill Ryder Jones, amongst other developing artists. And I'm also a part of MMF, which is the Music Managers Forum, and a board member there.
Fantastic. Okay, doing the alphabet here, we're coming to Nathan next.
Hi, from Broodnell in Leeds. We are a venue, 2 400 capacity rooms. We also promote many shows across the city and region, and from grassroots, smaller venues from 80 capacity up to 5,000 and above. I sit on the board of Association of Independent Promoters and generally talk a lot around. So great.
Well, that's why we've got you here today. And finally, we'll get Sybil to say hello.
Hello, I'm Sybil Bell. I am founder of Independent Venue Week, which is running this week. This is the second day. It's our 8th consecutive independent venue week here in the UK. We've been funded since year 2, very gratefully, by Arts Council England, and we've been running in the US now for 3 years. This is our first, and I hope for all the right reasons, our very last ever digital independent venue week. It's run as a live event in the US for 2 years. They also had to do a digital version last year, and we're just very grateful that so many people have got behind it this year.
Fantastic. So there we go. That's our panel introduced. So as I say, the aim of the next hour is to look at how the live music community has responded to the COVID challenges and all of the various multitude of issues that it has created. And although we will be considering, the extent of the negative impact of the pandemic over the last 12 months, we're also going to be having a look at the positive side of how the community responded and the various initiatives and programs that were made, and maybe how that can benefit the live music community. First of all, as we hopefully at some point in the coming months start to come out of this crisis, but then actually maybe we can build a stronger live music network and community long term. But I suppose let's start with the shock of COVID first, and I'm going to come to Nathan first to sort of get your perspective. Well, the way I come at this is I work on a music festival called The Great Escape. This time last year, I was in Moscow running some music workshops for the British Council. And you might remember one of the first cases of COVID in the UK was in Brighton. It was someone who came back to the UK with the virus, and they were in Brighton. And somebody asked me in Moscow 12 months ago, is The Great Escape happening this year? And at that point, I was like indignant. It's like, well, of course The Great Escape. What are you talking about? I laughed at them saying, of course The Great Escape is happening. And then, of course, within a month of that event, The Great Escape was not happening in 2020. And I'm just interested, from your perspective, at what point last year did you realize just what a massive, major impact COVID was going to have on you and your business and all of your plans for 2020?
It was almost slow, but a slow burn at first, because you've got to remember, before we as a venue started shutting, there were things like the Coachella cancellation, and then South by Southwest, and other things creeping in generally across the board that you started to notice. As a promoter, those tours weren't going to happen, and that started to affect the venue. And then you had, Mr. Johnson, Prime Minister, come and say, don't go out, don't go to pubs. And then it slowly built into, this is lockdown. And that was the immediate shock. But I think there were also those ripples before it, like, the waves coming in. And that was kind of, the immediate shock was shut down, loss of finance, loss of output, and then trying to rethink how we can connect and stay relevant at that time. And also just, put our head above the parapet and shout about what we feel is needed to be shouted about, and what like social and health benefits. But I think that's it was a slow kind of ripple at first, and seeing it come and hearing about cases in Italy and places like that come first. So yeah,
no, it's interesting, wasn't it, in those first few months? First of all, yes, it was sort of like, is it going to have an impact? And I think it's interesting, just this week the reports came through that the Miami edition of the Ultra Music Festival in the US is almost certainly going to be cancelled again. And for journalistically, that was the first time we started reporting on COVID, because that was the first big US festival that got cancelled because of the pandemic. But then there was those several months, weren't there, of being, okay, this is going to be a couple of weeks. Oh no, it's going to be a few weeks. Oh my God, no, it's going to be a few months. Oh my God, no, it's going to be till the end of summer. Oh my God, no, we're talking till the end of the year. And here we are in early 2020. And I mean, as a venue, as a promoter, I mean, what is your current position? I mean, are you still, there was that period where everybody kept rescheduling stuff and just pushing stuff back. Are you still rescheduling those shows, or is it now sort of, let's just wait and see what happens in the next 3 months?
It's been Groundhog Day for nearly a year. Simply as a venue, taking external bookings. We're simply getting up each day and doing the same conversation with the same agents, with the same managers over and over. And the period that was where we were in March last year coming into it, and that we were booking for, September, October, November, December, and early 21, that moved in the summer into mid 2021. And now we're at this point in 2021, and we're looking and booking way into 2022. I were at the point earlier today, going to put on Twitter, just like February 2022 is going to be very busy. You know, like it's insane. Everyone's trying to fit 18 months of tours into one small period, because we're not talking about just a year we've gone. We're talking about the forward projection, and I think it's just a constant maintaining of shows, maintaining a level of relevance. But as a venue, we also have a social responsibility to the people that come to us as well. And I think that we, you know, not, and I mean the immediate community that are around us, our patrons, but also the music community that come with us. And we've tried to maintain those connections there through streaming shows, advancing tech, learning and upskilling our staff, and making sure that we can work with as many people. So we worked with Rough Trade on their new Acts to Go Express and ATC Live to get it into Eurosonic only last week. And it's those kind of partnerships and maintaining relevance at a local level and international that I think is that's keeping us going at the moment. You know, the booking and rebooking of shows is monotonous.
Well, we'll come back to those partnerships, because I think that's a key thing that we're interested in here today. But I'm actually going to get Sybil's perspective now, because I mean, I know when we caught up at the start of the month, when you were, by that point, we knew it was going to be a fully online independent venue week. But I know, and I think lots of people tuning in will be able to empathize with this, that in essence, this year, you've had to plan 6 different independent venue weeks because you had no idea which of those was going to be possible until relatively late in the day.
Yeah, I think we're probably on version 27 or so. I don't know. I mean, it's crazy, because even when we were planning last summer and looking at things, we knew that we had to have every eventuality sort of covered. But I think we had so many venues. It's been quite challenging in terms of, we've got venues that have shut their doors. They didn't want to speak to anyone. They didn't want to open. They didn't want to have conversations. And we totally respected that. And then we've got venues at the other end of the spectrum, places like the Broodnell, who are like, what can we do? Let's get active. Let's see what we can do for the week. And we want to do as much as we can. And we've got a few venues like that. And I think what's been really difficult is putting something out there this year that felt like we were mindful of everybody, but looking after those that wanted to, you know, keep to their own sort of their own way of doing things. And it has been really challenging. And to lose the socially distant shows that we knew were going to happen was tough. And I, you know, I've said before, I hope this is, for every reason, the very last digital IVW we have to do, because I set Independent Venue Week up to get people off their screens and to get to go out in person and walk through the doors of a venue and not just listen to music, but see what people are wearing and look at the artwork on the walls and just immerse themselves in culture. And this is the absolute opposite of what we're doing. And I think this year has been a real challenge. It's been about 10 times as much effort for a tenth of the output, and doing things digitally is a huge learning curve. And I have to just take my hat off to Nathan and Joe at the Broodnell for their extraordinary help and support. They helped us with the digital version of Independence Day, and they're helping us enormously with a lot of the tech for this. We're learning on our feet as we go, and as much as we're learning on our feet, we don't want to lose the opportunities to have events and activities going on, because we're not quite sure of the tech. So there's a lot to deal with, and a lot of our venues and promoters are also learning on their feet. So we're aiming to deliver as much as we can in a way that feels sensitive to everybody, but does just bring that spotlight and a chance to celebrate people who have made it through this year, and you know, whether they're active or not, and just remind people just how important and vibrant these places need to be again.
Okay, I know Ellie was nodding in agreement with a lot of what Nathan and Sybil were saying. I mean, coming at it from a management perspective, I mean, I suppose it's interesting when you look at the impact of COVID on the music industry, how obviously the music industry has lots of different strands to it, hasn't it? And you've got the live sector, and you've got publishing, you've got merchandise, and then you've got recordings and streaming. And I think, you know, most people will be aware the streaming side hasn't been affected at all. Meanwhile, the live side has been put in shutdown for a year. So different elements of the industry have been affected hugely differently. But I suppose as a manager, you are cutting across all of that, because your artists are cutting across all of that. But would you agree that for a lot of artists, the one revenue stream that went into shutdown, live, is actually the most bankable revenue stream? So actually, although you've got some elements of the music industry doing fine, as an artist, the bits of the industry that have been most hit are the ones that you rely on for the majority of your income?
Yeah, certainly independent artists. The reality is, there are a lot of independent artists. Streaming just doesn't pay. Certainly in the music that I certainly work in, you know, it's either guitar or composer or band music, and they're not very good genres, but you know, you get your gist. And I think the point being is that, you know, they, on a streaming level, they just don't stream. So yeah, you know, like Warm Douche, one of my artists, they tour, you know, they were due to tour pretty much non-stop last year, and you know, they had a sold out Heaven that was 8 weeks sold out, and that was meant to happen at the end of March, and we still don't know when it's going to happen. So the reality is that it's hit the independent sector really, really, really tough and really hard. I know so many artists who are trying to pivot, finding ways forward. I mean, you know, I look at Nadine Shah, who is, you know, drawing pictures to find an income so that she can pay her bills. You know, that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be the way forward. And, you know, I'm happy to call out the labels and say, you know, not one of the labels has come to me and said, are you okay? Do you need any help for your artists? You know, and I feel like we have to be working together as a team, and work understanding the reality of how, you know, the income of artists have been hit completely decimated. Same as promoters, same as venues, you know. And I think we and managers as well, you know. So many managers have been completely hit by this. So we have to work together as a team. It's so vital.
Come to David next. I mean, obviously your membership, I'm sure would you know, repeat and echo a lot of what Ellie has just said. And I suppose as an organisation that is there partly to be advising those people and giving those people ideas and information to help them both deal with the short term and plan for the long term, I imagine you, like Nathan and Sybil, it's a moving beast, and the advice you're offering and the way in which you can help as an organisation is constantly changing, because there is so much insecurity and unknowns that you're having to keep up and then share that information with your artists.
It is, and I think to Sybil's point, really, I mean, the sort of idea that there is an artist and that's the one model for an artist. Artists are as diverse can be, and some artists may not have been affected by this because they don't rely on live, and we've got to acknowledge that a little bit. But to Sybil's point about the venues that do want to do things or those that don't want to do things, likewise with artists, some artists will want to live stream, some artists are never going to do that, and I think we've got to acknowledge that a little bit. And I think that the one thing that I would say in all of this is you mentioned streaming not being impacted, but the across recording and publishing, for example, and live, there is no one that is untouched by this, whether that's publishing money coming through at a later time, whether that's independent record labels who rely on physical product, which is not doing as well. You know, I think there's no one that's left out of this. So my view would be that we need to, as you say, we continue to pivot, and we are continuing. We were talking backstage before this about the fact that we've all gone, and Sybil made the point as well, we've all gone through 27 iterations of what the next steps are, what planning for the future looks like. But I think one of the things that I would say is that we all have to be in this together now. I think that's the one thing that's sort of shone through for me in the past coming up to 12 months, is that we need to be quite holistic in how we approach this. And that's both within our networks and across the whole industry. I think is really important that we're communicating as much as anything.
Well, I'm going to come back to Nathan and Sybil on that. I mean, as someone who's written about the music business for 20 years, it has always felt that in terms of different people within the industry coming together, within terms of there being trade organizations, in terms of there being organizations that sort of campaign. I talked about how the music industry has all of these different strands, and it has always felt that the recorded music side and the publisher side and management, they've often had more formalities where they come together. I think because ultimately they're copyright businesses. And when you're copyright businesses, you have to do a lot of campaigning to make sure the copyrights are being protected. Whereas I think the live side has been much more fluid traditionally, with a few exceptions in recent years, and obviously Independent Venue Week being one of those networks that's brought people together. But what I have seen in the last 12 months is promoters, venues, agents, from the biggest to the most grassroots and independent, have started to come together out of necessity. And I mean, I'll start with Nathan. I mean, are there any particular initiatives or groups of organizations, or indeed your own projects, which you think have, you know, really helped just by bringing people together and sharing ideas and speaking as one?
I think at the start of, I say at the start, but, you know, maybe April, May time last year, we just realised, or I realised, that there's an awful lot of conversations that weren't happening, and the mental health of a lot of people. Other venues it started where we had a conversation there, and then built out and reached out to several kind of trade organisations where David and a few others were on the calls, and Sybil, and we just wanted to try and get a collective understanding of what's next, what's coming, how we're going to protect, you know, things like the talent development pipeline, where can we get the positive change, and how much, in effect, social responsibility for our ecosphere as us being in positions do we have to maintain it? Because it'd be really easy to put ourselves down and walk away and do something different, but there's a kind of a pull and an affinity to what we do and how much we enjoy it. And I feel it's a part of like the social responsibility to maintain that, but also to look at the next generation and the people who might be, you know, more affected than what we are. I think it's really important that there is those, not just for labels and the recorded side, but usually, and I'd like to say this, it was something when Ellie were talking, David, but for me, the industry has always been top down. It's always been the labels and live and the agents and the artists then dictating to the manager, and the manager then dictating to the agent, and the agent going to the promoter and then to the venue. And it's the only time that actually the whole thing's been put on stop at the live side. And when you're talking about have the labels been effective? Well, yes, they're not picking up the ancillary new fans that might go along to the shows with their friends that then buy 2 records and then buy a t-shirt and support an artist tour. The whole thing's interconnected, and I do think that there's a responsibility there from labels. But at the same time, that when you're talking about those connected conversations, I think it's been really healthy for other associations to speak to each other more and have the time and for the first time ever, take up technology like this and talk to each other at any point that we've never done. We'd have to get on the train, and I would have to go to London and have this before. That's changed. And I think that's the speed and the adaptation of it has brought it on massively. So I think that there's positive changes, and I hope that we can kind of embrace them going forward and just step back to the way it was, because who says that the way it was before was working?
Yeah, no, and I think that's various really good points there. And I mean, it's obviously there have been, I'll come to you in a moment, David, there have been, and also the Music Venue Trust have been incredibly prolific over the last 12 months in rallying their cause. And Music Venue Trust were already very active within UK Music, which is the organisation which exists to bring all the different strands of the industry together. But I think it is remembering all those different organisations that sit under the UK Music banner. They all have their constituencies, and but we're all part of the same chain. We're all part of the same community. And it's just making sure that every group is equally represented and every group is talking to each other. And I think also, yes, that maybe one of the upsides is that because the industry has traditionally been quite London centric, a lot of these meetings have traditionally happened in London, and therefore those people in London, those bits of the industry which are predominantly based in London, have perhaps had an advantage. And that's been smashed. I mean, it doesn't matter where you are anymore. I'm going to come to Claire in a moment just to talk about the Cultural Recovery Fund. But first of all, David, did you want to come in response to something that Nathan had said?
Yeah, I was just gonna sort of echo what Nathan was saying, really. And I think we've sort of lived with this arbitrary recorded versus live division in the industry. No fans care about that. No artist gets involved in the industry because of that. we sort of dissect that behind the scenes a little bit, and I think it is quite an arbitrary division in some ways, and I think that that coming together is exactly. I just wanted to echo really what Nathan had said. Is it's been a good time for us to take stock, because it's not how the rest of the world really thinks about the industry. It's quite an internal industry thing, I think, and I think it can be quite unhelpful really as well. So yeah, it was just to reiterate what Nathan was saying.
Can I just expand on it a little bit as well, talking about not just the live side, but I would look at the people who've come through my venue, who've worked with us and gained the experience, that are now senior executives at record labels. I look at Ali Tan and people like that hone their skills on the ground in venues and in small labels, and I don't think that's necessarily appreciated as a two-way living organism, and I think that needs to be brought together a lot more. Not just alive and recorded, but everything that supports it.
Because although we're here officially to try and look for silver linings and a positive spin, I think what you're identifying here is the hidden negative impact of this that we're going to be dealing with for the next 5 years. But before we come to that, I want to bring Claire in. I mean, partly because sitting at Arts Council with a music remit, you're sort of on the receiving end of all of these different groups within the music industry coming to you looking for help. But before we get your take on that, I mean, just for those people who don't understand, maybe you could just quickly explain to us the role Arts Council played in distributing that 1.5 billion approximately that the UK government did set aside to support the cultural and heritage industries through the COVID crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's been sort of several rounds of emergency funding that we've put into place. So at the kind of immediate reaction to the pandemic in the spring, Arts Council drew down on our reserves, and we spent about, I think it was in the end about 880 million on an immediate emergency rescue package, and that was mostly made up of lottery reserves, a tiny bit of money left over from grant and aid that we had from the government for previous years. But I think at that stage, obviously, we were hoping that an immediate response to help get the sector through lockdown would suffice, and that we'd then start having a roadmap to recovery. And obviously, things have proved somewhat different to that in a number of quite catastrophic ways. As many of you'll know, the government made available 1.57 billion, but of course that was not only money to go to all of the 4 nations of the UK, but also money that was to go to other sectors that sit under the remit of the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. So money went to Sport England, to the Heritage Lottery Fund, and so on. Arts Council's initial allocation was 550 million, and we dispersed that over what technically is now called one round, but in fact was sort of 3 separate rounds over the summer period. So we had an emergency fund for grassroots music venues, which ran in August. We then had what was called at the time CRF1, which was, I think, in September, and then we're now in the midst of doing what's called CRF2, which is spending a little bit more money that's left. And that Cultural Recovery Fund round, we had 2 programs, one which was grants and one which is repayable finance, in other words, loans for larger sums of money. And it has to be said that the music industry have certainly taken advantage of the opportunity to apply. I think a lot of people would imagine that the Arts Council would mostly within that be supporting not just perhaps our national portfolio organisations, who are the organisations that receive regular funding from us on an ongoing basis, but maybe those people who had previously had success with accessing public money through Arts Council's National Lottery Project grants or other schemes. But in fact, a huge proportion of the applicants to the fund were from the more commercial elements of the industry. It's too early for me to give you precise figures on that. But I think we're kind of looking in the region of kind of 60 to 70% of the successful applicants in music were from the commercial end of the industry. And in terms of the quantum of money that's gone to music, we're looking at somewhere over £100 million. So it's a very significant intervention to date. And as some people will realise, today was the closing date for the round 2 of the Cultural Recovery Fund. I had a few slightly impassioned messages first thing this morning from people very worried about the joys of Grantium, our lovely portal. I think the other thing I'd want to say, because it's something that I think probably isn't or hasn't been particularly clear to everybody, is the extent to which Arts Council has been the grant holder in this case, and our job has been to disperse it, but it's not really our fund. So the parameters of the fund have been determined and designed by the DCMS in conjunction with the Treasury. And that's impacted a number of the things around the formation of the fund, and particularly ways in which perhaps it's differed from the funds that have been offered in Scotland, Northern Ireland and in Wales. I think the most notable difference in that respect is something that David and Ellie will probably be particularly aware of, which is the lack of opportunity for individuals to bid into those funds. Obviously, individuals were able to apply to the emergency funds that the Arts Council offered from our own resources in the spring. But individuals haven't been able to apply to those later funds. But there are a number of other differences as well, and I think particularly notable is the move more recently to recognise the sort of impact of groups of organisations coming together, because there are within our industry a number of organisations who sit under parent groups or parent umbrellas of that kind, and also recognising that as we go into the second round, the resources are stretched, frankly. First time round we had 550 million, we had around 3,000 applications in total, and we were able to support a good percentage, so typically around 60%, although aspects of the music industry did much better than that. This time round, I have to tell you that, and again, it's far too early to talk about numbers, but the demand on the remaining funds is significant. So it is a very kind of pressurized decision-making environment. And this time we have 2-week turnaround to make those decisions.
In terms of all the different strands of the music industry, I mean, first of all, obviously you can make genre distinctions, and some genres operate very differently, but then we've had the strands that we've talked about here, which is labels, publishers, managers, and on the live side, promoters, agents, the production crew, venues, etc. I suppose one thing that's interesting, for the reasons you've just explained, an awful lot of businesses and organizations who would never have even thought to open up an Arts Council application form have applied for this funding, and in many cases received this funding. Has it been a learning curve for you and your team that you are dealing with lots of organizations and businesses who are not usually Arts Council funded, don't really necessarily even understand how Arts Council funding works? How has your team navigated having those new relationships, those new connections, layered on top the slightly confusing different strands of the industry who don't traditionally necessarily talk to each other?
I think my headline would be that it's been an absolute joy. Actually, it's been really helpful to have bits of the sector who've, I'm not going to say that they've regarded Arts Council as an irrelevant element of the sector, but as an organisation that they really haven't needed to engage with. Lots of people, it has to be said, hugely proud of the fact that they've operated without any public funding to this point in time, and to some extent not just anxious about putting themselves in the frame for public funding, but actually finding it quite difficult to take that step because of that pride in their independence. And I think, what I would want to say is, in this situation, this is not a moment to feel that there is any kind of negative dimension to applying for public funding. Arts Council's job in this is to advocate for arts and culture in its entirety. The part of the sector that is normally supported with public money could not exist in the form that it does without the rest of the sector. And our job normally is to intervene in a way where there's a need for particular public intervention, where something isn't going to happen of its own accord under the terms of the kind of commercial market. In this situation, obviously, it's been quite different. And I think In terms of what's happened, I mean, you know, we are more used than people might think to dealing with commercial organizations. You know, there are some quite big players in the commercial sector who do routinely apply to us for money, and some of them are even national portfolio organizations. You know, you could look at Sound City as an example, or NTS Radio. We've got music venues in the mix, like Band on the Wall in Manchester. So, you know, there are lots of organisations, and I mean, I'm looking at Sybil, who has definitely got plenty of experience of putting in applications to Arts Council in this mix. But I think the big challenges have been around people understanding the kind of language of the Arts Council, and I'm going to say almost the kind of the need for ultimate truth. Our job is to get absolutely into the core of the detail. So when people have been, you know, dealing with submitting financial information, you know, these are commercial companies. They normally trade on a certain amount of confidentiality. You know, nobody really wants anybody else to quite see inside their business model or necessarily understand where some of the pinch points and pressures are. We have needed everything on the table, warts and all. And actually, where people have struggled with the process, it has tended to be because of that kind of formulation of finances that really, warts and all, lays everything on the table, or a way of describing that that's actually an incredibly simple language. People have often thought that we're looking for something complicated, where actually what we need is the most direct statement of the truth. But you know, inevitably, with the volume of applications we've seen, we've got an insight now into the entirety of the music business, which we've just never had before. And I can only conclude that that will massively improve our ability to operate in the future.
Chris, can I just come in on that?
Yeah, do come in.
Because I think Claire explained my position particularly, but many others, and I'd never ever picked up an Arts Council form, looked at the website properly until the COVID-19 fund, the first fund that come round. That upskilled me, not in, you know, academic terms, but in thinking about why should I be doing this, and also in future what benefit my organisation can give to the community, to the artists that we commercially could not do, but have the facilities and the platform to do it and get it there. And that's a new way of thinking. And what Claire's describing is, we sometimes as a commercial sector think we can't do that. You know, we can't take the risk there. And we see the benefit, but you can't do it because it's your mortgage or your livelihood or whoever else is. And I think that taking what you described where about applying, one of the things I felt personally is, and I talked about social responsibility, but if I'm going to take any public funding and be open with it, I need to deliver, and I've got a responsibility to do that, not flippantly or anything. And I think there's a really big kind of weight and understanding from a lot of organisations that would never have thought like that before. So you kind of said everything that we've done in the last 6 months.
Well, no, and I suppose, you know, everybody across the entire music industry, and 20 times, a million times more on the live side, it has been a phenomenal learning curve in many different ways over the last 12 months. And obviously some of that learning is simply how to get through the current crisis, or how to get to next month, or how to get to next week. But I think that's really interesting. But some of it is learning that might change the way you do business even once everything is back to normal, and open up new opportunities. And I think that's really exciting. I'm going to come back to both Nathan and Sybil. In turn, we talked about how the live music community has rallied, whether that's through a music venue trust, or it's through an independent venue week, or in more informal ways. It's just getting on Zoom calls or being on a WhatsApp group in sharing that information. I mean, do you think that are there any things in particular that you think have achieved a great deal? Or the flip side of that is, do you think there's still any gaps in that conversation? Are there groups within the community who, for whatever reason, haven't really been brought in that conversation, and maybe we should be encouraging them to join the conversation or reaching out to them? And I'll ask Nathan that first and then get Sybil's take.
Yeah, we hinted on something earlier where we started having conversations between people, and then I met David and other people in the associations, and we started building that. We've noticed the Association of Independent Promoters grow and get stronger together where they would have competed before. But aside from the general associations, there feels like there's these other organisations such as Attitude is Everything, you know, the merchandise companies that rely, you know, the transport company and everyone else that are not necessarily in the conversation, the ticketing companies that when we talk about the live groups or the UK Music Live Group, it's a set kind of sector, but there's very little understanding of how you can get cohesion and synergy and understand that for me, you know, Attitude is Everything, talking to the ticketing company, talking to the associations. If we all build around and know what others' campaigns are, whether it's around diversity, inclusion, or anything else, it can stop a lot of wasted time and effort in other areas. And I think that needs to happen. I think a lot of associations, and especially with, I was having the conversation earlier today about funding, and people are just gatekeepers a lot of the time, when actually, you know, we should be sharing the information because that can support each other. And part of it, we were kind of talking a few months ago about setting up the Council of Independent Music, which was talking about not just lobbying, but that isn't the point. It's about all these other ancillary separate bits of the community that rely on support on each other, whether it be about mental health and organisations that can support musicians and venue owners and road crew through it, not just financially, but importantly overall. That conversation to me needs to happen at some point and is really crucial. And I think that hasn't been tackled, and that needs support, and people want to avoid it, but I think it's really important. I don't know if Sybil's got any other thoughts on
yeah,
that.
I was going to say, I agree, and I was, you know, we were on some of those calls with David and Nathan, and we had people from the Music Managers Forum and agents, and it was, I just remember one call in particular being quite enlightening. There was also almost like a penny drops moment where everyone on the call identified that they all wanted the same things, but actually, because we'd never all got together in even just in this way, that, like Nathan said, there were so many gatekeepers that the converse is like Chinese whispers. What started up in one corner, by the time it made its way round to everybody else, had changed slightly. And I think one of the things that excuse me just one second, one of the things that's what COVID has really shown is just how much of the creative industries is built on freelancers and project funded organizations rather than guaranteed income. And I think if you look at what the opportunity is for the grassroots music community, and if you're trying to break into the music industry and you don't have wealthy parents, or you're not, you know, you don't have any other way to get into the industry, walking through the door of a venue is the easiest way to start out. And these venues and the people that operate in them offer the greatest opportunity for changing the mindset of people as they grow up and they grow in their careers. If they want to stay in grassroots music venues, fantastic. But if they want to go up into indie labels, then major labels, or become a major promoter or a major agent, what they learn in these grassroots venues will shape that. And I think what Nathan was talking about when we were discussing the idea of this Council of Independent Live Music is not just the venues, not just the promoters or the agents or the artists, but everybody that's in that sort of grassroots sector, and not just people at the early stages of their career, but the freelancers and the people that operate independently, coming together to support each other to make sure that the way that we shape how we move forward is a lot more transparent. There's a lot more parity. Artists want to play these venues, and everybody in between, that from an artist to when the show happens, has a piece of that action. And actually there's been a lack of transparency around how that's happened. And it really felt, Nathan, I think you probably remember the call that we were on where there was a point at which people said, well, actually everybody wants the same thing, so let's work out how to do that. And I think it's quite telling that a lot of agents have had to let their agents go, and a lot of those agents have now set up on their own, and perhaps not just as agents, but agents with other agents or agents with management companies. And there's this whole flourish of new small SME music businesses starting up who are now interested in finding new ways to do things that is more transparent, more sustainable. And actually I really hope we can see it changing the way that a lot of activity happens going forward.
A new affinity for each other, I think, for all different parts of the industry.
But
I think so, and I think greater understanding. Sorry, Chris. A greater understanding of what of what everyone's been going through, and I kind of liken it a little bit to, all these parents who've been home teaching, having a newfound respect for teachers. People have been cutting their own hair, newfound respect for hairdressers. I know it sounds like an odd comparison, but actually now people understanding much more so what's going on in each individual sector within the industry, and actually far more in common to make these shows happen at a grassroots level. But I think that learning at the grassroots level will take time, but will come up through as people get further up the ladder and in the industry for longer.
But I think you both brought up the sort of freelancers there, and I think that is potentially, if there is a gap in terms of this network and this sharing of ideas and support, you sort of fear that maybe the freelancers, particularly on the live side, now obviously artists and songwriters are freelancers, so we include artists and songwriters in that. Although I suppose at least certainly frontline artists, featured artists, at least they have an audience and they have a website and they have social media. They have a place that they can go and be active. Whereas if you are a freelancer who works in venues or on tours or in festivals, but you don't have your own audience, then I sort of feel that yes, we have the various different trade bodies, they come together in music, there's a live music group, etc. But often maybe those freelancers are the gap, and actually for those freelancers, the venues are probably the closest they have to a trade group. That's their network. The fact that they know people at the venue, they know they're freelancers at the venue or the festival they work on or whatever. And so maybe almost festivals and venues, as well as coming together to champion this, also have a role in reaching out to their network of freelancers and making sure that they're getting the information and the support. I'm going to come to Ellie next, because I think one interesting thing to get your perspective on is, we talked earlier about these different strands of the music industry. David mentioned in some ways they're kind of artificial, but they're definitely there. But the manager is the one business partner. I mean, the artist as well, obviously, but the manager is the one business partner who does cut across everything, because you're doing deals with all of these people and your artists are doing all of this activity. Although, do you think, because you have the agent on the artist team, who traditionally sits between you and the live music industry, whereas you have hands-on relationships with the labels and the publishers and the merchandisers and the collecting societies, you have an incredibly close relationship with the agent, but maybe traditionally you're slightly more removed from the rest of the live sector because you have that member of the team whose job is to manage those relationships. And do you think that managers should be having more of a direct relationship with venues and promoters and the wider live community?
I mean, I think the big thing, the word I think we all have to remember in any of these situations is symbiosis. Everything feeds everyone, and the music industry is symbiotic. It always has been. And so, as a manager, I'm always very aware of that. I mean, I started out working in a venue. I'm a northern kid. Didn't have rich parents, and I strived at university and worked in a venue in Liverpool, and I started out that way. And so, yeah, there is a disconnection between, I suppose, the agent and myself and the venue. But I've known Nathan for years. I've known many. I know most venue promoters around the whole of the UK, and they can always reach out to me if there's a problem. I'm quite happy to get on a call, and in fact, I really believe in that. If I feel like the agent is not doing right by both the venue, the promoter, and the artist, then, I'm always open to a conversation. At the end of the day, we all have to come back to this point, which is symbiosis. So we have to make sure that everyone is eating and everyone is looked after. And especially right now, and what I say on the calls to my agents is, at the moment, the most important thing is survival. We all survive. That's artists that survive, and it's managers that survive. It's venues that survive. It's promoters that survive. So I think it's so vital to always be talking and listening, because listening's the biggest thing. We can talk, but actually, do we really listen? And so, yeah, it's hugely important to do that. And that's why I started on the MMF board, because I do have a lot of experience from being a promoter and being at a record label and now a manager. So, I can see every single part of the industry. And so it's so vital to keep them conversations open all the time.
Looking ahead, I mean, it's because we are still in essence in the middle of this crisis. We are still very much fighting a fire. And although the vaccines mean that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe in December we got all a bit more excited about that than we are now. And obviously the news of Glastonbury earlier this week, maybe it was predictable. It's such a big event. It doesn't necessarily mean other festivals have to follow suit, but it does make it feel like we still have quite a way to go until we start returning to something nearing normal. But if we do look ahead beyond the crisis, and we look ahead to shows coming back, tours coming back, and ultimately are just getting back to normal, but how normal do we want to get back to? So of any of the new conversations that have happened, the new initiatives that have happened, are there ways in which actually the live music industry had all sorts of issues pre-COVID, and maybe we can address some of those issues by having more joined up thinking and more conversations like this? So I'm sort of interested in getting everyone's opinion on that, but maybe I'll start with Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, I alluded to it earlier that just because it worked before, it didn't mean it was working. And I think there's a big difference just because it achieved or it went one way. I know that's really obvious to say, but I do think that there's a massive, which everyone's heard in the last, year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years about the talent development pipeline. I think there is a real responsibility on the labels there. I think the labels have got to look at how traditional models of socializing and going out to a venue are becoming more competitive, not from inside the music industry, from Netflix, Amazon Video, gaming, all the other things outside of music that are becoming, it's becoming, and because of the advent of technology, we can go on a streaming site and get instant access to anything that we haven't got fed into one way. The options are there and open to us all that like never before. And I think that those who have got that kind of position need to start thinking about their own, not short-term company future, but the whole ecosphere and everyone in its long-term, long-tail economy. And I think that's why I go back to that social responsibility again. I think that there's a massive gap that's sometimes lacked in the industry that needs to take account of itself and stand up and stop hiding, if that's quite ruthless to say that.
Okay, I'm going to sort of ask a similar question to the rest of the panel, I guess. I might come with David next.
I think, first of all, one thing, so your question was really about what might change from pre to post all of this. One thing I really desperately, I'm sure won't change is our need to get in sweaty rooms and jump around together and listen to loud music. I think that's the one takeaway that I think we could probably all agree with. I think Nathan said a lot of what, both in the last answer and previously, he said a lot of things that I would agree with about the fact that the collaboration and the conversation being more open is a very good thing. And you remember that we've been in this now for 10 to 11, coming up to 11 months. The music industry formed over many, many, many decades. So we can't expect it to be perfect at this point. But if you look at where we were in March 2020, and you look at the amount of communication since then compared to now, we're in a very different place already. And to clarify my point around the sort of arbitrary division, of course there are reasons for those divisions, but my point was that ultimately there is a sort of Disney reference, but there is a circle of life in all of this. The record labels feed the live feeds the record labels. That's where the A&R happens. And ultimately, fans are fans of music. They're not usually fans of just live or fans of just recorded music. And that was sort of the point that I was trying to make. So I think that things like, individual parts like the live streaming is the obvious thing. I think some of those things will continue and are here to stay in some form. But I hope that this is sort of, I suppose, if we're the generation of professionals, if you like, in the industry, I hope that we've sort of all learned something as a generation that's had to deal with this and is going to pass that down the line. But I think a lot has happened in 11 months. So I think that there will be ongoing changes from this that are sustained.
I'm going to get the other panelists' input on what are the learnings long term. But I mean, we are sort of running towards the end of the panel. But anyone tuning in, if you do have any questions, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, you can tap them into the comment boxes, and I probably will have time for one or maybe two final questions to take from the audience. But I mean, let's continue this conversation. I might maybe come to Sybil next in terms of are there learnings, are there initiatives that have happened over the last 12 months that could actually do the industry that you're championing, make it stronger and better long term beyond the pandemic?
I think so, and I think it's this transparency that we've been talking about is going to be really important. As people are saying, when a venue is going to open up, the venues will open their doors as soon as they're able. But artists haven't played for a year. You've got crew who haven't worked for a year. It's not going to be a case of opening the doors and everything's going to return to normal. There's going to be a staggered process where people refamiliarize themselves. Are people going to want to come through the doors again very quickly? People have been nervous about mixing in groups, and I think we do need to look at that, and we need to look at the freelance economy, I guess, and see how we support those people, because a lot of people who have been freelance and been in their roles for 20 years are not coming back into the industry. There's going to be a plethora of talent that's not going to be there, and that's going to be experienced talent. So we need to plug that gap. I think for gig goers, if we're talking about what we're doing as Independent Venue Week, I think this week we're encouraging people that if this was a real live Independent Venue Week, if they were going to their local venue, go further afield. Go if you're living down in London or in Wales, go and visit the Broodnell online. Go up to some venues and visit these places online, and then as soon as we can, get together with some mates, take a weekend off, and actually go around the country and visit these places in person. Because whatever you're seeing online this week or beyond this week, or you've seen during lockdown, these places are pretty magical. And I think one of the learnings for me that I hope that the industry takes on board, and also the public, is get out there in person and become part of the fabric of what you've been supporting for the last year, because there's nothing quite like getting on the road. Bands do it all the time. The reason they love touring because it's so bloody great. But if you want to get out, just go on the road and go on a tour yourself, get around the country and see what you've been supporting and how important the circuit is.
Coming to Claire next, I mean, do you anticipate once we get to that point, which we're hoping comes sooner rather than later, where organizations are not in crisis mode? It's not about we need funding to stay in business. But do you think some of those businesses and organizations who had never opened the Arts Council website before got some funding, it helped them stay in business? Do you anticipate them possibly coming for support in the future? Would you encourage that? I mean, we all know your funds are incredibly competitive already, but do you think that one of the outcomes might be that you are supporting a more, a wider range of music organizations long term?
Sorry, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we're seeing that happen already. There are organisations who applied to both the emergency round and the Cost Recovery Fund first round who are already putting in applications for our project grant scheme. And you're absolutely right to point to the fact that, there is an unprecedented pressure on funding at the moment, because we are one of the few organisations to whom you can reasonably come. So we've seen success rates drop from normally around 65% down to less than 20%. So that gives you some sense of the demand we're facing, which is particularly challenging, actually, because our role is to try and, as I say, address things that might not happen in the sector without our intervention. And where you have dramatically increased demand, both from people who might traditionally have been successful but might find it a little bit more challenging, but also worryingly people who've never tried before, who decide that they're feeling brave enough now to take that step, and then who receive a rejection, that can be a really negative thing. So I mean, I think one of the messages I'd want to get across very firmly is that unlike other experiences of applying for funding, if you're unsuccessful with Arts Council, take on board the feedback, but do come back in. It really isn't a closed door if it doesn't work. And actually, that might take 3, 4, even 5 attempts, but it really is worth it if you believe in what you're trying to do. I think the other thing I'd say is that a lot of the time when people in the past have been unsuccessful in applying for funding, there are a number of things that can relate to, and some of them are pretty obvious, like balanced budgets and things like that, but other things in this mix really fit with the conversation we've been having today. So evidence of partnerships or looking for funding to support the development of new kinds of partnerships that are going to be sustainable, that are going to be able to be embedded, and that importantly are clearly going to provide benefits either to artists in the pipeline or in fact for audiences. That's another great way to bring things in. And I think, if you think about some of the things that we're hearing at the moment, and I think I would just, in view of the conversation we've had and what we've not maybe talked about, you look at what's happening for children and young people in the country and the extent to which they're missing out on opportunities now. You think about that generation of people who might just have been beginning to progress into the gig-going public. Those people are maybe going to need their hands held to walk across the threshold in a way that they might not have had to do in previous years. So almost, ask yourself the question, if we were going to build back better, who hasn't been coming to our venue before? Do we really know and understand why they haven't been coming? We've got some time at the moment. Let's find ways to ask them. We can do that through social media. We can do that through our local community, maybe make some partnerships with community organisations, further education colleges, schools even, and start having those conversations about what would it take to help people come through the door, what would be interesting to them, how can we work with them. Those are the kinds of projects where very quickly from the Arts Council you'll get interest, because in our new strategy that we published ironically in February 2020, we're very, very clear that what we're looking to do is build a nation which is invested in creativity, has access to creativity, and sees that kind of creative activity as a core part of their life, whether it's something they're doing themselves as an artist or something that they're able to consume. So I think there's masses of opportunities. I don't underestimate the demand, but that will even itself out over time. So I think we're really hoping that some of these new conversations are going to be sustained and allow us to work with organisations, with individuals, and in places that we've never had the opportunity to work before.
Finally, going to go to Ellie to get your perspective on this. I mean, Nathan several times has rightly mentioned the talent pipeline and the absolute vital importance of whether it's venues or grassroots communities, little scenes, which is where when we're doing our educational CMU DIY workshops, that's however digital age, social media age we might live in, we all know the way to find an audience, the way to hone your sound, the way to build a fan base is to get out and play and get out and network and get out and meet. And so, Sony Music, Universal Music, Live Nation, Google, YouTube, Spotify, they've all got a vested interest in that talent pipeline. I mean, do you think that they can be persuaded to do more support for the grassroots and independent, whether that's short term or long term? And is there anything that the independent community, the grassroots community could be doing to try and fight for that and argue for that with that audience?
Yeah, I think all technologies need to be helping launch artists right now. So many young artists at the moment don't have the platforms they had previously. Normally, you would play shows. So whenever you're building an artist, you have many different parts of how you build an artist. You have media, so that's radio, press, streaming. And then you have live. Now, that major part has disappeared, and so what we ask certainly from a management point of view, and certainly just with my normal management head on, is that we ask that please, like technology companies, help support them artists that would have probably broken through live, that might not have been a streaming audience, that might not have actually been something that would necessarily build in any other way, and give them platforms right now. They need it. They need it more than ever. So I think that's really vital. And going back to venues again, I started in a venue, and Arctic Monkeys is 15 years old. Their first album last week or this week, and my friend posted it on social media. Said, "Oh, Ellie, I remember hearing the first demos in your flat," and I saw them. I saw them in Wigan, in a small venue in Wigan. I saw them at Night and Day in Manchester. I saw them at Jabez Clegg in Manchester. I saw them in the Boardwalk in Sheffield. I saw them at London Garage. The point being is that we need venues. That is how you break artists. Certainly in my world and the world that I live in and breathe in, and how how all my artists live and breathe, we need them. So I think, we all need to be helping each other, and technology needs to be certainly helping and making sure that them venues stay alive and them artists stay alive, so that we can, fight another day in hopefully in a few months' time, maybe in a year's time, I don't know, but hopefully soon.
Yes, and I suppose, and to sort of summarize what's being said here is, yes, at the moment we're still talking about crisis funding to keep people in business, to pay rent, but actually once things start to swing back to normal, we're going to need a whole load more support to fill the gaps that have come about, to get everybody slowly but surely back into business, to help, reinvigorate everything, to get people into the venues, to give those artists who've been sticking around for 12 months the head start they need. There's going to be a lot more work to be done, I guess, is what I'm saying, even once we can all be back in venues together, whenever that happens. And I suppose it is, all of these networks and conversations are a big part of that. But there is a lot more work to be done, and hopefully more government support, more Arts Council support, but crucially getting those, the record companies, the streaming companies, the people who have been slightly more immune to COVID. We're going to need their help for several years to come. We're not just talking about several more months of lockdown. Anyway, we're sort of coming to the end of our panel. A very interesting first conversation for us to have with the free panels that CMU is presenting as part of Independent Venue Week. Tomorrow night at 5 p.m, I'm just going to very quickly look at my notes. We've got a panel on access to arts and culture, how COVID drove long overdue change. So basically looking at how by things shifting online, both performing and watching performances has become more accessible geographically and for disabled artists and for disabled and deaf music bands, etc. And so we're going to be looking at, again, the upsides of what COVID has created, but also the new challenges that we've discovered along the way. So again, it will be that there is some positivity there, but some challenges that we need to address. And then on Thursday at 5 o'clock, the future of the live community, I guess very much carrying on the conversation here today, a little bit of future gazing. We've talked about here today that we loved the output of the live music industry pre-COVID, but we weren't necessarily completely happy with what was going on behind the scenes. So can we address some of those issues, and what will the live music industry of the future look like? So that's Thursday at 5 p.m. These are free panels sitting alongside a great program of other conversations, some quizzes, and other great stuff that's happening alongside the fantastic performances that are available as part of Independent Venue Week. So do go to the Independent Venue Week website and you'll find ticket links for our panels. They're all free, but also how to access the other sessions, conversations, and live streamed and pre-streamed shows that are happening as part of Independent Venue Week this year. So yeah, that will wrap that up there. So thank you to Sybil, to Ellie, to Nathan, to Claire, and to David for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Really interesting conversation. And I hope to see you all again. Well, let's hope next time we group to do one of these, we are sitting on a stage, and we can then go and, get a drink or something to eat post-panel. But instead, as it's online, we'll just have to wave and go and make our own evening meals. But thank you for tuning in, and I hope those people watching at home can see you tomorrow night at 5 o'clock for the second of our CMU panels as part of Independent Venue Week. So there you go. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.